So it seems like we have quite a few people already in. Still a couple of them coming in already now, but I think we need to get going since this is a short webinar. So this webinar is automatically captioned. You can use the CC button in Zoom. It's also recorded, and you will find the recording on our YouTube channel, and there are links also from our website if you want to see it again or send it to somebody for them to look at afterwards. There will be a short presentation followed by a Q&A. And please do use the Q&A function for any questions to the speaker, which is today it's me. And my colleague Stefan will also publish our smart guides or the smart guide that belongs to this session at the end of the session, and there is also a Swedish translation in Lathund for those of you who prefer the information in Swedish. And your microphones have been muted to avoid any distractions. So let's get going. Today we are going to talk about user involvement, and I'm going to just make a very brief overview of some of the research that we have been carrying out, a little bit on best practices, and also tips and recommendations on a standard that can be used when preparing for or making sure that you have that you are using user involvement in your design and development processes. My name is Susanna Lorin. I'm the Managing Director and Chair of the Funka Foundation, and I'm also the chair of the Joint Technical Body Accessibility, and that is a group that has a responsibility for making sure that there are supporting standards for the European legislation on accessibility. And I'm also representing the UN initiative G3ACT, as well as the International Association of Accessibility Professionals to the EU. We rarely meet people or organizations saying that our goal is really to create a product that no one can use or that makes people angry or frustrated. But still, as I'm sure you know, we sometimes meet or try to use products and services that doesn't really make sense or are extremely difficult to use. And more than once, I'm sure that you have been screaming in the direction of your computer or phone and wondered who did this stupid interface and why isn't this more logical? And it's interesting because I think most professionals when it comes to ICT and many other people as well are in agreement on that. Of course, you need to know what the users or the customers want. Otherwise, I mean, it makes no sense making products and services that nobody wants to use or that no one can use. So user involvement and user testing and user input and so on and so forth should be kind of a very logical starting point for everyone. When we do research on these things, we find that there is really a broad consensus among many different types of organizations and professions that user involvement in different ways and different perspective is effective, because if you involve users, you know that the product or service that you are developing or designing is actually meeting the needs and the requirements and the wishes of your users. So it's an effective way of knowing that your product or service has a place in the market at all. It's also a very efficient way to make sure that you won't get a lot of bad will or negative feedback after launching a product that the users are not satisfied with. So it's a more efficient to talk to the users before instead of kind of being hung in media afterwards. It's also kind of a user-friendly way of developing things, not only that the product becomes more usable and useful maybe, but it also is a good kind of corporate social responsibility way of doing things, that you show that we're interested in what our customers want and we're interested in how they find our product or service, and we want to make sure that they are happy and satisfied. So you can also be perceived as a caring organization if you work closely with your customers or users. I would also claim that it means a reduced risk when it comes to making investment that doesn't lead to any return or any positive things, but also reduced risks when it comes to accessibility and legislation, where you may have different kinds of requirements that you need to meet, but if you do not talk to your users, then maybe you will not detect these problems or the issues that you have. So most people do not argue against user involvement. They think it's a very good idea. But still, when we and many others have researched how many IT products that really involve users or user testing or focus groups or any other user involvement, we come up with many different numbers, but they can range from almost nothing or a couple of percentage up to, I think, 30 or so percent is what we have mostly seen. It, of course, depends on where we are in the world, how big the IT project is, if it's in public or private sector, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that any of those numbers are the correct one or the truth, but when looked at from different angles and different perspectives and kind of cut and sliced in different ways, we find many different numbers, but none of them is even close to half of the projects being developed and designed with users actively involved, which is a bit surprising since we are all in agreement that they should be involved somehow, and still they are not. And then if we ask for or look for in the literature which IT products involve users with disabilities in focus groups, user testing, any kind of involvement, then I'm now showing a blank slide because it's almost not measurable. So if you have the broad perspective of all ICT products that you can find in different chunks or different studies and so on, and then how many of them actually do something involve users somehow, that is a small percentage. But when you cut it even more into who are using who are involving users with disabilities, then it's almost zero, very close to it. And of course that is not true, because many of our clients, and I'm sure everyone listening to this webinar today, are involving users one way or another. So it isn't zero, but it's really very, very hard to measure the number because it's very small. So we keep wondering, where are the users hiding when, for example, our clients come up with something that is clearly an internal perspective? So we are redesigning this system, or we are rebuilding this, we are revamping the whole thing, we are doing something with our website or app or service that is for our staff to have a better, we need to handle this in a better way, we need to reduce time spent on these things and so on. So it's a very internal perspective. And then if that is too much focus, then the user perspective of this is sometimes totally forgotten. There may also be technical reasons. We need to update, we need to review, we need to redesign this because our supplier says that something has happened, or we need to just update because of something in the development of the underlying system, or what do I know, and we need to just make this update for a technical reason, which is of course valid and fine. But then when that happens, maybe something also happens with the user experience here, and that may also be completely forgotten in those places when there is a technical reason for a redesign or a rewriting of the code. It may also be the case that you have a very good supplier of ICT in general, or your accessibility expert supplier, or some other expert that you're working with, and that they are very firmly, they know everything, and they are very, they can really tell you how to do things, and they claim that they have done this so many times before. This is almost kind of a standardized way of doing things, and we know because we've always done it this time, and we have been doing testing for 20 years, blah, blah, blah. So we don't need to do anything more because we know how this is supposed to be. That may be true, but it may also be just that it's the cheapest way of doing it, or that's just the way they usually do it, and that nobody knows really why. So don't always believe your suppliers or experts when they say that this is kind of the way it should be. You should always be skeptical to that. There may also be legal requirements, of course. There may be any kind of legal requirement that means that you need to make a change, or you need to have cookies, or you need to have something around GDPR, what do I know? There's now also a lot of new requirements on sustainability and cybersecurity, and all of those legal requirements mean that you may need to do something, of course, with your product or service, and then maybe not thinking of how is this perceived from the user side. There may also be organizations that want to meet the accessibility requirements, but do not think about that as anything else. That's kind of a technical standard thing we need to follow. But as we all know, the accessibility requirements and the standards are really very democratic documents, because the only thing that you know is that they guarantee that everything is equally bad for everyone, maybe also equally good, but at least that it's equal. So accessibility requirements or legislation doesn't mean in itself that something is high quality or easy to use. So the legal requirements cannot only be kind of technical or legalistic, they also always need to be tested with real users to make sure that it works. When asked, in different research projects that we have done, and also other research projects that we have looked into, there are a couple of things that kind of is recurring when organizations describe why they know that user involvement is good, but still didn't do it. So tight deadlines. We didn't have time. There simply wasn't time enough. We had to launch this date and it was not possible. So tight deadlines may be true, but I would call it bad planning, because usually it's not like you need to make an update of your website until tomorrow. You usually have a little bit more time. So I think tight deadlines is not really a valid reason. Another recurring reason is that there's no budget, or we don't have money enough. There is no budget in the system, then there are no resources for this, which may of course also be true. But again, if you plan it better, or if you require the budget, or if you maybe do something else a little bit less, then voila, there you go. You have budget for end user involvement if you want to, in most cases at least. There's also a recurring claim that we do not have the competence in the team when it comes to either to user testing, but even more specifically when it comes to user testing with people with disabilities. And that may definitely be true, but I mean, there are people out there to help you. And it's also not impossible to do user testing without being an expert. I mean, just do one test with one person, your neighbor or somebody. That is much better than not doing one test with one person, even if it's not the perfect user test that will show you everything, and you don't have kind of the holistic view of all users with all assistive technologies and so on. But still, it's much better to do one test with one user than not doing any test at all. And then comes the argument that we really don't feel comfortable with. And that is when organizations say that we really wanted to do this, but it's so difficult to find the users. I don't question that it can be difficult to find users that would like to participate, but when we kind of scratch a little bit on this argument, we often find out that the organizations who claim that it's very difficult to find users, they are the organizations that normally do not pay users. So if you find it difficult to find them, then try a little harder and make sure that you pay users, because if a user is supporting you to make your product or service better, I think they should be paid as the experts they are. They're experts in being users. So make sure to pay them. And that, of course, is especially important when it comes to persons with disabilities. So if we look at the kind of success stories or organizations that we work with who have succeeded in kind of changing from not involving users to today involving users much more, we see that they have looked at good examples. They have showed that either in their own organization or in a competing organization, somebody did launch a product or service, did get negative feedback, and then changed and made it better. So you can prove your point by showing an example. Either it has already happened in your own organization, or I'm sure you can find an example somewhere else. Some of them a little bit embarrassing maybe, but also good examples. And when you have got your management or the people who decide your working processes to agree on this and understand the point, then make sure to make it part of the workflow or the day-to-day processes so that it becomes something you always do. Of course, not every update or every sprint can have a super big user test. That won't be feasible, but you can always try when you plan your design, redesign, or development, then you can always try to plan where does it suit this specific work or this task or this assignment, where can we get the user in? And then make sure that you always follow that path, of course, and don't forget it. Another recommendation is to start small. If your organization is completely new to this, then I don't think you should start with asking for 100 testers or 3,000 focus groups. It's better to start small. And then you can build from there. When you have documented and follow up, because if you make sure that you write down what did we learn and what corners did we pass through and how did we improve based on the user feedback we got in this work, then it's easier to next time show that, okay, we need even more money or better budget, more time to do this because, hey, we learned all of this the last time. So this means that this is a good way of working and we need to repeat our success and learn even more. So documentation, not only of what you learn or what your team learns, but really making sure that there's a path that you can follow and then show afterwards that this has been a positive way of working. And even if I do think that user testing can be done without being an expert, sometimes it is good to ask for help. So especially if you are testing with people with disabilities who have a combination of different operational systems and assistive technology in different versions and so on, it can be tricky to understand where is the actual problem here. Is it in our service or is it in the assistive technology or is it the user that are not used to doing this or that? So you may need a little bit of expertise or experience, and it can be really good to ask somebody who has more experience in this for help just for the analysis so that you don't jump to conclusions based on the user testing results. So some tips and tricks here, what you can use if you like to. We were involved in a project that created some training material that is free and open to everyone to use. So it's called Intax. It was funded by the Erasmus Plus program, so a European project, where we did a literature review where you can read more on all these numbers that I showed in the beginning. And we also collected best practices. So the literature review was more from the research side and the best practices more from the industry side or the commercial companies. And then we created training material on how to include users in user testing and so on. And there is also a handbook for trainers, so that you can use this at university or in vocational training or otherwhere. There are also some user scenarios based on user involvement, and then also recommendations more for the higher education who wants to implement this in their courses. So all of that is free of charge, and I think that we have also shared the link in the chat if you want to read more or download the material here. This is something that is free of charge and everyone can use it. And another recommendation is to use the standard that is called the EN 17161. So a European standard that has a long name, Design for All, accessibility following a design for all approach in products, goods, and services, extending the range of users. Very short. This is not a free resource, but it's a very good resource. It is a procedural standard, so it shows you how to use a design for all approach in order to achieve accessibility. So the accessibility is the outcome of how you work with your development and design processes. And it really has a lot of informative support on, for example, organizational leadership, also on planning and implementation of user involvement, and evaluation and improvement, kind of continuous improvement. And this standard is already out there and existing, and we will share also a link to the standard, or where you can buy the standard. And it's currently being updated under the mandate 587, because this is one of the 6 standards that are reviewed and developed to support the implementation of the European Accessibility Act. So right now, it only contains informative support, but still very good. It has been out in the market for a long time. And it's currently updated to also act as presumed conformance for the European Accessibility Act. So that's another good resource for you. And then we have, of course, the actual users. So you don't need to, if you just go out and meet the users, then you don't need all this theoretical background and documents and text. User involvement can happen in so many ways, and just a couple of them. I mean, why not recruit a person with a disability to your team? It's very easy and very welcome. And I know that then you don't need us or any other expert to support you, because then you will have this baked into your everyday life, and accessibility will come as a natural part of what you're doing. So work actively with recruiting people with different abilities. That kind of variation in your staff and in your team will for sure help putting accessibility or having accessibility on the agenda in a very good way. You can also, every time that you procure or select your supplier, ask them if they have people with disabilities hired or among their staff, or how they work with end users with disabilities when they test their things, so that you know that they're working actively with this. That is also something that you can ask your supplier or have as a merit when you procure next time. You can, of course, also just work with end users ad hoc, just walk up in the street and get people in and ask them if they want to test things. That is absolutely fine. You can also work on having like a test panel or a network of testers that you bring in every now and then. And really anything works here, but it's good to at least know where you can find these people so that you can kind of easily get the involvement going the next time you need them. Another recommendation that is a bit maybe work fantastically well, but may also be tricky, is to reach out to the organizations representing users with disabilities. These are, of course, the real experts. So I would like to recommend it to always do it, but I also know that many of these organizations do not really have the bandwidth to respond to all the requests that they get. So it's not necessarily true that you will get help this way, but it's always worthwhile to try. And again, of course, if you offer money, then it's easier for either for the organizations themselves to allocate time and staff, or to reach out to their members and see if there is anyone among their members who are interested in supporting you to make your product or service better. And then, yes, so if you don't want to hear sales messages, then don't listen now. But of course, we do sell user testing. We do carry out user testing, and we have a broad network of testers with all sorts of disabilities. So if you're interested in us helping you carrying out user testing or any other kind of user involvement, focus groups, or any other reach out, then you know where to find us. Any questions before we end up today? Please suggest a couple of ways on how to recruit disabled testers. Yeah, I think I hope I did that, but if you cannot find people via the organizations for persons with disabilities, then I think it's also possible to just reach out to people where people meet. I mean, you can go social media, you can look for people in your in your grocery shop. I mean, anywhere. People with disabilities are out there in society just like everyone else. So you can just start looking, and just as long as you are very clear on what you are looking for, and that you are also providing some kind of compensation, I don't think it's impossible to find users with disabilities. There are a lot of you people with disabilities also who are unemployed, unfortunately, a larger proportion than when you compare with the population at large. So it should be possible, really, to find people. I'm relatively new to Sweden, but my impression is that it's considered frowned upon to pay users for participating in studies. Could you elaborate on this? I am not sure that is true, or I hope it's not true. And it may differ in maybe medical. I don't know if that is the case. I mean, there may be ethical consequences to these things, but as far as I know, we don't have any problems with our testers getting paid, and I get paid when I work. So why wouldn't a person with lived experience of inaccessibility be paid? To me, they are the foremost experts and therefore should be paid. What we can see sometimes are that people with severe disabilities who are not in the workforce, but they are in some kind of support system, they may have difficulties receiving money or receiving salary because they are on some kind of social security system. So then you need to be very clear on what position or what situation this person is in. And there is always ways around this, and I'm not talking about illegal ways, but you can ask for or you can provide gift cards, or and also often there is a limit on how much you may or may not earn. So that's another possibility. But just be clear and ask people what kind of situation they are in and what kind of compensation they would be looking for. And we are a small organization with very low resources. Even if we wanted to pay, we couldn't. So are we going to make tests, or should we abstain because we cannot pay? So that's, of course, there are organizations that are not able to pay users. I realize that, of course, is true, but I think there could be a way also for that. And I wouldn't say abstain from doing user testing if you are a not-for-profit with small resources, but then be very clear with that and ask people and let them know that you're then a not-for-profit and this is for the common good. I think if you explain that clearly, then people can say yes or no. But the reason I'm so kind of strongly advocating for payment is that I'm very irritated that persons with disabilities are seen like just that they should just provide their expertise for nothing, just to kind of help the world become a better place. I don't think that is something we can require from persons with disabilities. Rather, on the contrary, we should be happy that anyone wants to help us make our products and services better. So thank you. I see we have quite a few questions left, but it's only 1 minute, so I will provide a little bit of marketing for the next Friday webinar, which is in 2 weeks' time, so on the 14th of March. Same time, my colleagues Malin Hammarberg and Sara Källstrand will talk about accessible cookie banners and provide some insights from our very currently finished research projects that we did last year, and also some best practices on cookies. That may sound like not the sexiest topic ever, but actually it is. Cookies are much more interesting or annoying or frustrating or interesting than you can imagine. So join us on the 14th of March to listen to my colleagues talking about accessible cookie banners. And I believe Stefan is also providing the link where you can register for that webinar in the chat as well. And with that, we have reached the full hour, and I will say thank you for listening today. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a lovely weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.